My name is Joe Kelly, and I am the morning show host at KRMG Radio here in Tulsa. And for the last several years, I have made a career out of interviewing Kathy Taylor professionally on the radio. So I suppose it's only fitting that I spend some time with you today to interview you about your time as mayor.
That's what I thought, and I appreciate you doing it.
Thank you very much. Let's get started with kind of a broad-based question for our 38th mayor of Tulsa, and that is, what do you see as your biggest accomplishment?
Well, I really think it is the approach I took towards government. My background, as you know, is business. It wasn't politics. And I had been fortunate enough to serve as Secretary of Commerce for Governor Henry at the state level, and I saw that the business approach that I took from my decades in business could be applied to government. So every issue that we looked at the City of Tulsa, we looked at with a business approach, both from the standpoint of analyzing the data and also from the standpoint of understanding that the solution doesn't always lie within the halls of City Hall, but in fact there is a broad group of citizens and businesses and partners that you can bring to the table to solve problems and provide services for the citizens of the City of Tulsa.
You reached out to a lot of different community groups, business leaders, a lot of public-private partnership type programs. Give us a couple examples of those.
Well, I think two of the greatest examples. One is the Gilcrease Museum, an amazing treasure given to the City of Tulsa, but we never had really the right financing to run it, and it's not a core service. Operating a museum is a very unique skill set, and so I reached out to the University of Tulsa and their president then, Stead Upham, and we entered into a partnership for TU to operate that museum. It has been successful beyond our most amazing dreams. In fact, the chemistry department is helping work with the curatorial staff, and they've now endowed a Thomas Gilcrease chair that is studying documents in that museum that have never ever before been reviewed and researched. So that was an important partnership to really leverage that asset. The other one was our golf courses. First budget year, we had a budget deficit, and I found that we were subsidizing our golf courses to the tune of $1 million. Yet we weren't providing some basic services. Our streets were in disrepair. We were closing swimming pools. And I said, no, give me a zero-based budget, which meant we closed some golf courses. That turned out to be not a very popular decision. And so I went to the citizens that were upset, and I said, let's form a committee and look at other solutions. And we ultimately brought in a professional golf course operator, Billy Casper. Our golf courses now have rounds up, complaints down, and we're not subsidizing them at all.
My father has a saying that you sometimes have to break a few eggs to make an omelet, and would you say that that's kind of how you've done this in a
Absolutely.
sense?
I would say that, of course, you make mistakes. You don't always make the right decision, but I think the important thing is having the courage to say, you know what, we need to look at this a different way. And when I actually went out to the golf course to meet with those citizens, you haven't really seen anything angry until you see a golfer whose course has been closed, and they were very upset.
Yeah.
And I said several times, you know what, you're right. Before they finally heard me say, you're right, let's look at this a different way, we came up with a great solution.
Now, as long as we're talking about public-private partnerships and athletic endeavors, under your administration, the City of Tulsa has seen a couple of athletic venues undergo some change, not the least of which here in downtown is the BOK Center, which got started under one of your predecessors but opened during your administration. And then we have a One Oak Field
right.
as well.
I mean, two interesting things about that. The BOK Center was under construction when I came into office, and there was a little bit of a budget overrun. I think it was in the $60 million. So we had to call the contractors and the architects together to get that back on track. But we also were scheduled to tear out our small arena. And we looked at that, and we knew if we had the BOK Center and the existing arena in the convention center, we could attract more sporting events. So we, again, changed course. We kept the smaller arena, and we expanded the convention center with the largest ballroom in the state to the north. And that has enabled us already to attract additional sporting events. And then we almost lost our baseball team to a suburb and brought together a group of community leaders and colleagues on the city council and said, should we try to keep this in Tulsa? They said yes, and we were able to do a public-private partnership where 50% of the funds to build that ballpark, One Oak Field, were donated by the private sector.
In radio, we call that NTR, non-traditional revenue. And in a sense, that's kind of a non-traditional revenue, the way that you have a public-private partnership.
Absolutely. And the same goes for City Hall. We consolidated 5 city buildings into one technology center, bought the building at a bargain price at 23% of its original building cost, and it was a brand new building almost when we moved in. And we're paying the bonds through leasing part of the space to private enterprise, to private entities who pay us lease payments. So again, non-traditional revenue for government, but that's where my background was from, is financing, and I don't think there's just one way to solve a problem.
When people look back at this video and your administration, it's important for them to understand that during your administration, the city of Tulsa, the state of Oklahoma, and the United States, and for that matter the world, has suffered under some economic difficulties, not the least of which is a recession. Mm-hmm. Would you say that that's been your biggest challenge in dealing with the recession?
I'd say it's been a significant challenge, certainly. I don't know that it's the biggest one. We have never, since 1972, had as many consecutive months of decreased revenue as we have the last 8 months, so certainly a serious challenge. But when you come from business, you're used to the ups and downs. The difference here in government is that you can't borrow. We're a balanced budget state. We're a balanced budget city. You have to keep your budget balanced at all times. So it keeps you looking at new ways to do things. And so we trained over 1,000 employees in lean processes and saved $5 million in 3 years just in doing things more efficiently and effectively. And I think that can continue. Certainly the recession, national and locally, is a challenge, but I frankly think my biggest challenge was in early December of 2007 when my phone rang about 5 in the morning and the fire chief said 75% of the people in the city of Tulsa are without power. We had the worst ice storm in our city's history. We went into a very antiquated emergency operations center where wireless didn't really work and tried to figure out how we were going to get the power to about 300,000 people back on before Christmas. It was a galvanizing point for our management team, and in fact we sat there with Post-it notes and a mark board, because that was the most sophisticated tools we had in that emergency operations center, and we designed a program and executed it that ultimately FEMA took as a model for the nation in responding to power outages and ice storm disasters.
I have long since purged that memory from my consciousness of that.
As many Tulsans have.
That cold and miserable time. Some 6-7 days for a lot of us without electricity, but for others there was
weeks.
Yeah.
We got almost everyone's power on by Christmas Eve, and that was the goal, but our team worked 24 hours a day. We set up a electric triage center, literally, for every electrician in the state to come in at the fairgrounds, and had power crews from all around the country in. It was a pretty amazing scene, and it was actually very rewarding because we know we actually saved lives.
Speaking about phone calls, I recall a time in which you got a phone call informing you that somebody had bombed Tulsa.
That was an interesting time. The call was from the deputy chief at the police department. He said, "Mayor, I have good news and bad news. The bad news is someone has dropped a bomb on the city of Tulsa." Luckily, he continued quickly, and he said, "The good news is it was one of ours, and it was an inert bomb." A couple had come home, and it was right after the ice storm, and there was literally a bomb in their bathtub. It had come through the wall. And as our Air National Guard was doing training exercises, it had gotten jostled loose, and they thought that it was the power company's fault because their power was off until they walked into their bathroom. Luckily, no one was hurt, and the problem was solved, and there was additional training at the Air National Guard.
Good times.
Yeah, good times. Exactly.
What would you say has been your most rewarding experience as the mayor of Tulsa?
I think probably 3 things. One is we brought a new issue to the mayor's office, and that's veterans. And my dad was in the military, and I hired a young, amazing veteran, a Truman Scholar, who helped us just leverage the resources already available to veterans, because what we found is there were resources there, but they didn't know how to access them. And so we've got our 211 center to understand all those resources so veterans could call 24 hours a day. We opened veterans resource centers at the airport and also in some of our community colleges. And the thanks that I've received from our Guard and active duty military and veterans for caring about what happened to them is one of the most rewarding things. I never served in the military, so to be able to say thank you and to do something for them was important to me. And then education, being with kids in our community, seeing the impact that truly a city can make on education. Again, like veterans, without really any city resources, but just our time and using the voice of the mayor's office to make sure that people understood education was a high priority. We brought Colin Powell in with America's Promise to figure out how we could increase our high school graduation rate. We know that impacts public safety and economic development and the health of a community. Individually, the moment for me that I'll always remember is being with Dr. John Hope Franklin, one of our city's greatest citizens, and I met him at the airport at Duke to bring him to Tulsa to dedicate a park in his honor. And he introduced me to some of his colleagues at Duke, and he said, "This is Kathy Taylor. She's my mayor."
Let me talk about education for a moment. Even just this morning, I saw that somebody had posted a comment on Twitter. Now, anybody watching this in the future, Twitter, I don't know how to describe what Twitter is, but when people are watching this 20 years from now, it may not even exist. But somebody on Twitter had posted a photograph of you serving food at a school. Now, Tulsa's mayor, whether it is you or your predecessor, anybody who comes along after, Tulsa's mayor does not currently have an official role with education, yet you have made it part of your administration to be very involved in the education that our kids receive.
Right, because it's the most important building block for a healthy community. Our dropout rate is significantly higher than it should be. That impacts crime, it impacts the ability to provide a good workforce for our citizens. But most importantly, our kids need hope. And in a state that incarcerates more women right now per capita than any state in the nation, where last year 42.5% of the babies born were born to single moms, these kids need every adult they can to reach out to them and give them hope and give them a guiding light. And so we realized that early on, and I reached out, received a small grant from Bank of America, and I asked the community to come forward and be mentors to kids in high-risk schools. 700 Tulsans stepped forward almost immediately, and they're in over 18 schools. And then we partnered with the local symphony to have mayors mentoring to the max with music, so kids who otherwise don't have access to music lessons now do and can have that kind of rewarding experience. And we've then recruited, helped with our school superintendent to recruit a program called Teach for America, really in a record time because we knew the need was so great. 82 of the brightest college graduates from around this country teach in the highest risk schools now in our city, and they're making a big impact. And the final thing we did on education, which was kind of a crazy idea, that the president of TCC and one of the state regents and I discussed on the 11th floor of Old City Hall one day, and we never thought we could make it happen because it took a lot of political courage to do it and a lot of leadership from the president of TCC. And that is to ensure that every child who's graduated from high school in Tulsa County can receive a 2-year degree tuition-free. We know that 83% of our kids in TPS right now are at or below the poverty level. They have no hope of going to college. Now they do. So I was at Street School today, an alternative school, serving lunch and talking to those kids. And almost every senior I talked to said, I almost dropped out, but for Street School, and I wouldn't be going to college, but for Tulsa Achieves. In 10 years, that changes the landscape of Tulsa, Oklahoma.
You mentioned it just briefly, but I know this was an important part of your administration, your mentoring to the MAX program. In fact, even as I walked into this conference room today, seated in your chair is a young lady who is shadowing you today. I mean, this has been an important part of your administration on a personal level.
It has. It's a rewarding part to me. When I was the celebrity runner for the Tulsa Run, I said I would do it if we could get a trainer for kids who could run with me, kids who otherwise wouldn't have access to that kind of physical activity. So kids from Gilcrease and McLean ran the Tulsa Run with me. I think that it's important for children to grow up understanding the impact they can make in government and understanding their government, because citizen involvement starts at a young age. And if they feel like their voice can be heard now, we can count on their engagement as adults.
You mentioned the Tulsa Run, and I know that much like with education, the Tulsa mayor does not have an official role in education, but you don't have an official role in health and fitness either. Yet you still made that part of your administration. Right.
Well, also because we looked at the data, and Tulsa and Oklahoma have one of the unhealthiest statistics in the nation. And so we knew we needed to get the health of our population better, and the leader of the city needs to take leadership. So we started Tulsa Million Miles, and we encouraged Tulsans to walk, swim, run, or bike 1,000,000 miles, and we did it in 1 year. We, as a community on the great trails in the city,
collectively 1,000,000 miles.
Collectively,
right.
1,000,000 miles.
I found it to be daunting when you said 1,000,000 miles.
Yeah, right. Collectively, we did it, and it brought us together as a community. So I get emails from people all the time who say they began their physical activity in order to take part in that community challenge.
River Parks, during your administration, has undergone some beautiful renovations. And I think of the generous contributions from community partners. But tell me about the generous side of Tulsa that makes us different from other communities. Tell us about how they have been partners with you and your administration for some of the projects that we've undergone.
Well, I think you see that throughout Tulsa's history, but Tulsa is one of the most giving communities in the nation, one of the highest per capita charitable giving rates and volunteer hours. And I can tell you that in my tenure, when I've seen a problem, whether it is the need to upgrade the trails at river parks, or it is the need to open a swimming pool, have a mentoring program, open a ballpark, I have picked up the phone and called community leaders, and no one has ever said no. You know, I gathered a group of technology officers from the companies in the city when I first got into office and said, help me figure out how we can upgrade, update the technology in this city so that we can provide better services to our citizens, more transparency. They volunteered their time. 600 citizens every month serve in various capacities in boards and authorities, and no one has ever said no. They've said, how else can I help?
Just a couple more questions for Tulsa's Mayor Kathy Taylor. Tell us about the evolution we've seen here in downtown, the impact on downtown development during your administration.
Well, it began when I came into office, and we redid 50 blocks of downtown streets, and I said those have to be completed before the BOK Center is open. We did it, but we did it in a business-like fashion. As those streets were torn open, we realized that we could bury lines for many things while the streets were open, and we did, and we ultimately ended up using that as another revenue stream. We then saw the BOK Center open. We revitalized and looked at the way we operated and marketed our downtown, and really supported the entrepreneurial environment. We did it with a specific business plan competition, but we also did it by just trying to make sure that we helped people with getting speed to market and their businesses being open. And we've seen a great number of young entrepreneurs come downtown.
As we sit here having this discussion, you're some 2 weeks?
2 weeks from the end of my term.
To the end of your term. Mm-hmm. What do you see as some of the biggest challenges that are facing the next mayor of Tulsa?
Well, I think continuing to appropriately finance infrastructure. We just passed, during my administration, the largest investment in street infrastructure ever in our city's history. We did it by impaneling a great broad citizens committee and getting citizen engagement. That education of citizens has to continue. And so the biggest challenge is operating government efficiently, but continuing to educate our citizens on what government is doing, what its needs are, and getting them engaged in the process. Citizen engagement, I think, is the key to having a successful, healthy community, whether it's revitalizing downtown as a neighborhood or revitalizing our schools, getting our citizens healthy. Having citizens at the table, knowing that their voice is heard, is the challenge that I think every mayor has to listen to.
Before we let you go, we've talked about some important issues, education and funding and private public partnerships. Certainly during the course of your administration you've had some fun, exciting, unique, cool experiences.
Well, I have. I've had some amazing experiences. Garth Brooks saved my life. When we opened the BOK Center, a flag almost fell on my head, and he gallantly stepped up to keep that from falling on my head.
I'm sure she's not exaggerating that at all.
No, he saved my life. I'm confident. And then I got to welcome Paul McCartney to Tulsa in the only arena tour of his latest tour this year. I got to personally welcome him to Tulsa, Oklahoma, which was an amazing opportunity for me and fun.
Well, I'm sure this brings to a close my not only discussion with you here today, but my discussions with you in an official capacity at all, as your administration is about to conclude. Tulsa's 38th mayor, Kathy Taylor. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate it.